I didn't mean to do it. I mean, they sold me out, and as soon as he asked were there any poets in the house, I was the one who got finger pointed. Pushed and shoved to the center of a carpet stage, a tiny bookstore in Montgomery, Alabama. It's called Roots and Wings. And I was probably standing somewhere between Nikki Giovanni's love poems and I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And I think I recall Nathan McCall because it definitely made me want to holler when I looked out at the 50-some-odd of my classmates' faces, staring back at me while I nervously tried my photographic memory, trying to recall the words on a page I'd written over and over again, but never imagined I'd say out loud in front of anyone. I was only 17. But somewhere inside, I found the courage, and it carried me line for line until the end. And even after all the hugs and smiles from friends, I was still shaking. That's when I knew this was real. That's when I knew that words have wings. They're kind of like birds, but mostly like children, who you groom and raise. You hope you shape them well, that a sky that has no limits will receive them, that someday somebody will take them home, call them their own, that they will find a place to belong. See, I came from a line where righteousness ran through the blood like sugar and Rolling Stone daddies. And maybe the people who were pushing me had been here long before my classmates, maybe my grandmother and my grandfather and their preacher siblings were pushing me too. See, they fed me parables and I acquired a taste for truth. They stood behind pulpits and I stand behind a mic, but just like them, I got to get on my knees and hum a prayer when words don't suffice. I got to learn to sing the hymns that cannot be found in hymn books. Learn to lean on everlasting arms and hold fast to the words only God can write on hearts, because these hands, they never knew picking cotton. But the hands that did knew how to spin stories, knew how to sew quilts of memories so I could see my family history in a stitch. And every time my grandmother speaks, I realize the words have roots. They're kind of like seeds, but mostly like trees who you groom and raise. You hope you plant them well, that fertile ground will receive them, that someday somebody will take them home, call them their own, that they will find a place to belong. And words keep encouraging me to dream, keep reminding me that God listens when I sing. And that's how I know this is real, and I am still shaking. Hey, Lipscomb. Okay, so I have a couple of prefaces to give this morning. First of all, I went to Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. We didn't quite have chapel, but it was called convocation, which is just a big fancy word for chapel. I unfortunately did not pay attention through most of those. And there's a law in the universe that God has established called reaping and sowing. I have unfortunately sown many seeds of not paying attention in chapel, which means today I'm not going to walk out there if you're not paying attention, if you go to sleep. It's like hypocritical for me to walk out there and do that with you. So I'm not going to do it because I fell asleep through a couple of chapels. There was some engineers, some scientists that came, and I didn't make it through those. I fell asleep. And we didn't have cell phones. I'm not really that old, but we didn't have cell phones at the time. Most people, this is like before 9/11 when I was in college. I'm really not that old. But so we used to write notes to each other. I spent quite a few chapels writing notes. Then I spent quite a few chapels actually going over my homework that I should have done the night before. All that being said, if that's you this morning, Godspeed. Godspeed. I'm not coming out there. But for the rest of you, I hope that you will at least not be bored to tears. Not be bored enough that you are like, I gotta write a note. I've got a cell phone and I'm still gonna write a note. This is terrible. So the first poem I did today was a true story. I started performing what is called spoken word poetry at 17 years old. And whenever I do that poem, it always reminds me of my great-grandmother. She's one of the grandmothers I'm writing about in the poem. Spent a lot of time with her when I was a little kid. And I've been thinking a lot about the things my grandmother was trying to teach me about God. And I'm assuming we're here in Nashville. Some of you have Southern grandmothers or Southern great-grandmothers. So maybe this will be familiar, or maybe my grandmother was weird, and none of you will have this story to share. First, I have dating advice from my grandmother, because I'm sure some of you are having problems in your dating life, and I want to help you. So there's a legend from my grandmother that in order for you to find out who you're supposed to marry, when you move to a new place, you put your shoes under your pillow and you will dream of who you're supposed to marry. In my grandmother's case, she and her siblings, there were 9 children in the family and their parents, they moved from the country into the city. This is probably around 1920, 1915, 1920, somewhere around there. So they're moving into the city. My grandmother says, we have moved. I will do this. I will put these shoes under my pillow. And she dreams of my great-grandfather, who she has never met. Well, the next day, of course, this is in a small town, and my grandmother had 5 sisters, so now their house has become the new place for social life, because there are 6 women. There's going to be some courting going on. So my grandmother opens the door, and there's my grandfather, come to see her sister. My grandmother did what any good woman would do. She told her sister, back off. It's my husband. I already dreamed about it. Don't do this. At which case, her sister is like, I've got so many guys to choose from. Take him. I don't need this guy. Turns out, my grandfather walks my great-grandmother down to the 5 and Dime, which is probably like the Walmart or something, where you get jewelry really cheap. Whatever, they walk down there, they court each other, get married, stay married until they both pass away in their 80s. What does this mean for you? The next time you go and move to a new dorm room, new apartment, just give this a shot. It couldn't hurt, especially if what you're doing is not working. You just might need to try like a new method. I tried it, and unfortunately, I don't know if I picked the wrong shoes. Maybe it should have been a pair of heels, and I picked a sneaker. Or I don't know if it should have been a flip-flop. I don't know. It didn't work out for me. I didn't dream of my husband, although my husband is wonderful. Thank you, Jesus. But that's for another time. But you try it. And if it works for you, you tweet me, and we'll co-write a book. We'll make lots of money. All right. The second thing that my grandmother was really interested in, I think this is a Southern grandmother thing, that when it stormed, my grandmother believed that you should unplug all the appliances. I don't know if your grandmother's, am I strange? Your grandma never did that? Okay. She felt like you need to unplug everything in this house. And you need to be quiet. You need to turn all the lights out until the storm passes over. Now, this is circa 1986. I am into My Little Pony at the time. Yes! Yes! My Little Pony is very serious. Do not underestimate the amount of time it takes to ready My Little Pony for going out. If you're not familiar, My Little Pony's made of plastic, but she's got like a tail of hair, and she had like a little bang mane type situation. And you had to braid that, which took up a lot of my time. Until my grandmother says, it's about to storm, no playing, turn off all the lights. She's unplugging everything, alarm clock, TVs. Like, if she could have got back to the oven, she would unplug that too, but she couldn't figure out how to get back there, so she just said, God's gonna have to accept that I can't get back to those 2 things. She would always say, when it storms, you be still and you be quiet when God is doing his work. And I told her one day, because I was 6 and I was selfish, that I hate it when it rained. It ruins the whole playing outside situation. And she turned to call my grandfather, and my grandfather was a portly man, which means his belts were like this big around. So when she did this gesture right here to my grandfather, and I realized that meant, Johnny, take your belt off, I took back these statements about hating when it rains. I was like, I misspoke. Freudian slip, whatever. I totally didn't mean it. That was for psychology majors. So I totally didn't mean that. I was like, I love when it rains because I don't want that belt on me, like in any place. But now that I'm older, my grandmother passed away when I was about 17 years old, and I think back on those summers that I had at her house. I think back on her unplugging all this stuff when it rained. I think of her saying to me, "You be still and you be quiet when God is doing his work." I think of the way my grandmother would get on her knees on a hardwood floor and pray to God every day. And she would lay on her bed and she would sing to God. And I look at myself now, like many of you, we're growing up in this modern generation. We've got access to the world on our cell phone. Like, I can wake up in the morning and literally find out what is happening in the world in 2 minutes. My grandmother didn't finish 8th grade, never finished high school, never went to college, didn't have purpose-driven life and 5-star church, didn't have all these theological discussions to have. But when she sat on her bed at night and sang to the Lord, she knew that he listened to her. And the older I get, the more I want to know God like that. Because it's one thing to know a lot of facts about God. I could know a lot of facts about Will Smith. I could know where he was born or how many kids he has. I can know some of the lyrics to his songs, but it doesn't mean I know him for myself. I feel like that's a part of what she was trying to say. She was trying to reiterate to me what Psalm 46 says when it says, "Be still and know that I am God." And wherever you are in your journey today, we have to know God for ourselves, because my grandma couldn't know God for me. My mom or my youth pastor or my professor couldn't know God for me. I had to get to know God for myself. And it feels unfortunate that in order to know God, it's like an ancient practice. There's nothing modern about what it takes to know the Lord. It is being still. It is being quiet. It is prayer. It is reading the Bible. As much as I wish I could make that thing faster, make it have more speed, more DSL or something with God. It's not how it works. To follow Jesus is to walk an ancient path, which is going to be interesting for all of us, growing up with all our modernity that we have. That's a GRE word. You should write it down. Growing up with all this modernity that we have, it's still important for us to take that basic time that's away from Twitter, away from Facebook, away from our MacBook, away from all the apps and Yelp and Road Ninja and Angry Birds. Taking a moment away from that. If there's anything you try this week, try getting 15, 30 minutes. Quiet. You, God, journal, Bible. And I'm talking to me. Because I could wake up and just easily let me see what's happening on Twitter. Oh, what's everybody doing? Oh, no, she didn't say that to him. I'm already there. Before I'm even oh, that's right. Hey, God. Ooh, let me see what's on Facebook. Oh, look at her baby. Oh, she had a baby. He's somebody's daddy. You doing all that? When I first got to college, I was about 19 years old when I was exposed to my first real spoken word environment. I also feel it's important for me to dispel some myths about spoken word. When you see people doing poetry on television and in the movies, when the poem is finished, what do you see them do? They snap their fingers, don't they? It's unrealistic. It never happens in real life. As many poetry events as I've been to, that never happens. When the poet finishes, if you dig it, you clap. In some rooms, if you don't, you boo. But we're Christians, we don't boo each other. So, even though we should sometimes. But anyway, what you use the snap for is if a poet is going through a poem and you like something they say, you snap I dig that, I agree with that, so that they don't forget what they're saying. Because you could stand up and just be like, woo, bravo, in the middle of the poem. They'll probably forget everything they're saying. That's what the use of the snap is for. But here I am going to my first real open mic, which is in this smoky place that's probably half the size of this stage with 150 people in it. And there's a man in the corner smoking weed. I was a church girl. I'm assuming by television this means the police are going to raid this place. I'm thinking the police smell this. Wherever they are, they smell him smoking weed. They're going to be in here any minute picking this guy up. The host of the open mic walks over to the guy real strong, so I'm like, that's it. You about to get it. You about to get kicked out. This is happening, The host walks over, gives him the dap right here. Hey, bruh, gives him that.
So I'm like, you're not getting in trouble? You're going to continue smoking weed? What's the deal? But this was a perfect situation for me because it was the moment that I knew I wanted to do poetry. I wanted to do something that involved an art because I wanted to be able to take God's message into a room like that where there are guys smoking weed, where everyone doesn't agree when you make a statement about God. And even though now I still travel to a lot of schools, like being here with you guys, I'm still in a lot of churches and conferences. Every now and then I still get to go and sit in that room because there's something about that room that's important. That room is a dark place. It's a place where there isn't a lot of truth. There's a bunch of people saying what they think's true to them or doing what they feel is being honest, but they're not saying God's truth. And that's a role for all of us. Whatever that dark room is for you. For me, a lot of times, that's an open mic. That's a hip-hop event where I'm going to go in there and try and pray that God's light would shine. But when it talks in John 1, when it talks in there about in the beginning was the Word, first of all, I feel that John is a rapper. I don't know if y'all ever read John 1, but that's why I wanted them to read that verse because I feel like John was an MC, and that means Jesus and the disciples is like a whole different story I'm about to tell y'all. Okay, so go with me. So here's John. Who else would open up with this? If you're not an MC, who else would say in the beginning was the Word? And the Word was with God, the Word was God, the Word was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness cannot recognize that the true light who gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, but though the world was there through him, the world didn't even notice. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Even in his own land and among his own people, he wasn't wanted, but to those who believed him, to those who accepted him, to those who believed he was how he claimed to do what he said, he gave the right to become children of God, and the Word became flesh, made his dwelling among us. The Word became human, made his dwelling among us. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. Who does that? Who does that except for an MC? And I don't know if you do this when you read the Bible. Maybe I'm crazy, but I went on this whole journey with it, right? So I was like, oh, if John's an MC, that means bump the toga situation that they always put in the movies Jesus was wearing. They weren't wearing that. They were rocking these baggy jeans with Timberlands and throwback jerseys. And Jesus had locks and a goatee. It was like a big crew in him, and people were scared when they saw them coming. So I started thinking about that. I started thinking about family members and friends I have who the language they know is hip hop. They don't know who David Crowder is. They don't know John Piper. They don't know Donald Miller. They don't know those names. They know Jay-Z. They know Method Man. They know Wu-Tang. And how can I go into that room and tell them about Jesus? So I'm going to do a poem for you that I came up with in hopes of articulating, if I had to tell the gospel story through hip hop, what would I say? So after I would go through John 1, I would say this: Jesus came in the brand of his own name, wearing swaddling clothes, love, mercy, and a manger. 3 wise men discovered him. They had no idea they were leading the world to worship him. He told the angels to hold it down. Decided he was going down to a small town called Bethlehem to grow and consume the stomach of a virgin whose womb would birth the man that would save the earth, the one who would give me my worth. He did more in 3 years than most of us do in 30. He fed 5,000 with 2 fish, 5 loaves, told 51 stories to save millions of souls. He mentored 12 disciples to be betrayed by one, denied by one, doubted by one. He was the one to take on all of our mistakes, plus the weight of all of our secret and known sin, plus the weight of a 110-pound cross. That was after they beat him, slapped him, lashed him. He paid the cost. See, I've been watching you. Smoke blunts and meditate. Read the Bible and any other spiritual texts you can get your hands on. You're searching for answers to a bunch of philosophical questions like, what is life and who or what is God? Do we die? And if we die, where do we go? I've been waiting to tell you about this cat named Jesus, who has all the answers, trying to think of a way to describe him to you because he was a man, he is God, he came to this earth, lived, died, then he lived again. This one man started this revolution called Christianity, which has now been watered down to Bible-toting, t-shirt wearing, and keychains that say, what would Jesus do? I think if Jesus had walked the earth in our time, I think the Source or Vibe would have landed his post-resurrection interview and the cover would say, real life after death. Which is more than Tupac or Biggie could do, because all eyes would be on him. And they treat him like Diddy or Jay-Z, asking him, so what is the secret to your success? He'd tell them it's just one word, death. Death on a cross. Life after death and love. Yes, he would have talked about love because he has this way of looking into your eyes and knowing your whole life story without you even saying a word, because that's just the type of cool cat he is. And that's what I've been trying to tell you. He is. He didn't just come to speak, prophesy, and die. He's the only one who looked death in the face, told death holler back, and moved on without another thought. Truth is, I want you to know him. Sweeter truth. He wants to know you too. Jesus Christ is the true spoken word. How many seniors do I have in this room? Oh, I've got a few seniors. Awesome. Okay, so this is, for those of you that are not seniors, it is also for you, but the seniors feel the pinch of the story I'm about to tell because they're experiencing this. They're like only a couple months away. So I went to a very competitive school, as you all are as well. And at my school, my last year was a very hectic situation. First of all, because I really wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do when it was over. Secondly, because every week somebody was coming to the cafeteria like, I just got hired by JP and Morgan. I'm going to be working for Ernst & Young. I got into Stanford. I'm going to go to Yale. What are you doing, Amena? At which time you're like, I don't know. Stop asking me about it. So I did what any smart college student would do. I applied to grad school. I just figured that'll buy me like 3 more years, Hopefully have something figured out by the end of it. So I applied to grad school, 3 schools, received what is known as the thin envelope from all 3. You know if you get the thin envelope, it's not good information. It's not good news. They're not going, congratulations, we're going to send the rest of everything you need in another envelope. No. No. They're sending you an envelope that says, sorry, we didn't like you. Bunch of other people, just not you, right? At which point I am crying, graduate from college, no plan B. I'm working at a smoothie place, angry with God. And as his punishment, I am refusing to pray. And I'm hoping that he feels the pinch of that. Now you don't get to listen to me talk. Well, there I am at 22 years old working at this smoothie place, and through an amazing open door of God, received my first opportunity to perform spoken word professionally in front of like 1,000 people. And that was God's lesson for me, saying, the gifts I give you are mine. They're for me to shine, and my plans are always better than the plans you have for yourself. And if I would give any advice to you as college students, and especially for my seniors, because you're right here, the one thing that I did not do well is I didn't go to God first. I just looked at my life. I figured, you know what, God, I'm smart. I've got this whole thing figured out. I'm going to go ahead and write out my plans for my life. And then you just sign the bottom. Just tell me it's cool. Because other people need more time with you, especially like my roommate, she really needs you. So you can spend more time with her. I got this, God. I'm good. I didn't go to him and say, God, here are my gifts. Here's what I'm passionate about. Here's what I'm thinking, God. What do you want to do with my life? Would you show me? I didn't ask him. I did what I wanted to do, and then I got mad when it didn't work out, and I refused to talk to him. And with all that, he still worked out his plans for my life. So if you're in your last year here, if you haven't done this already, some of you are spiritual. You're more saved than me. You've already got this down. If not, however, if you're hard-headed like I am, you go to God. You ask him, what do you want to do with me? And James 1 says that God doesn't resent it when we ask him for wisdom. If we need help, we need to ask God. I'm going to close with a poem and actually a scripture that I wanted to read. I know you guys have been studying the kingdom, and I wanted to read one of my favorite passages about God's kingdom, and then I'm going to do a poem to close out. This is from Matthew 13. This is in the Message version, 44 through 46. It says, God's kingdom is like a treasure hidden in a field for years and then accidentally found by a trespasser. The finder is ecstatic, what a find, and proceeds to sell everything he owns to raise money and buy that field. Or, God's kingdom is like a jewel merchant on the hunt for excellent pearls. Finding one that is flawless, he immediately sells everything and buys it. For me, when I think about life, life is a big negotiating table. There's so many decisions for you to make. Who you're going to be in a relationship with, where you're going to work, what you're going to do for a living, what are you going to major in, what classes are you going to take. And all of it is going to boil down to, what is it going to cost me, and can I afford that cost? And there are many things in life that I have gambled on, that I put my everything into this relationship that was terrible and lost it all. And then there are times that we don't give as much as we should when we could have gotten a much greater return. And if there's anything in life that's a gamble, it's faith. God and giving your whole life, your everything to God is a gamble, probably the biggest gamble you're ever going to take. But it's the one gamble in life where you're going to get all the return you're thinking you'll get and so much more. Because the return on following God isn't just here in the stuff we can touch and we can feel. The return on following God is eternal. And maybe you're in here today and you haven't even decided if you really are on board with following Jesus. Or maybe you've walked away and you know it's time for you to come back. At any point, you can decide, you know what, God, I'm going to slide all my chips to the front with you. I'm going to bet everything I have with you. And that's the only safe bet we've got in life. So I'm going to close with this piece called Betting It All. And I hope that you will bet it all on what matters most. That you will bet it all on being still and knowing God for yourself. Dear God, I pray and close these eyes, knock these dice, I pray to win. Like last penny, itching to scratch $1 million out of one last dollar, like the difference between 10 seconds, 10 yards, and a touchdown, like dropping coins into slot machine wishing wells. All the world is a casino. All the men and women are merely gamblers, placing bets, counting chips, calculating risks. And these little bitty arms have tried their hand at boxing with God. Arms never long enough. Mind never smart enough to outfox him, because he knows exactly what's due to get me to honestly praying. Where I forget the cliches and all the stuff I say to make up for my lack of faith and trust. When I ain't got nothing else to give except giving up. It's tough to lay your oh-so-visible life into seemingly invisible hands, but at some point, we all end up in the place where Abraham had to stand, offering only hopes, with little to no hope of regaining what we think we stand to lose. But the amazing thing about God is he never takes away our ability to choose. See, I've stood at many forks in the road, put my life on hold, bartered with God for a compromise, trying to minimize my sacrifice, hoping if I raise him a Sunday morning, maybe he won't see my Friday night. But ain't no betting with God unless you betting it all. That's heart, mind, body, soul. So most times, I fold. And with every lie, the stakes get high until I'm in over my head in a debt I'll never repay, until this humble hustler asks the dealer to deal him in, says if he wins this hand, all debts are on him, but we don't believe him.
He looks too new to the scene, like he never cashed in a chip, never smelled the scent of newly minted green, but he just smiles and holds his cards close to the chest, says, focus on hearts and let the rest worry about itself. He came to pay debt with death so I could see him face to face. And when it was time to pay up, Jesus stood in my place. And that's how I know there's more to grace than bowing heads and praying over meals. See, it's not how much good we can do. God just wants us to yield. These little bitty arms have tried their hand at boxing with God, and now this heart is going to take a chance at betting it all.